For over 2 years, we've heard nothing but the Israeli hostages being pushed in our faces by mainstream media. What about the hostages that the Palestinians have had to endure? That doesn't get a mention, although over the last few weeks, since the so-called ceasefire was put in place, Palestinian hostages did capture the headlines. But nobody told us that 1 million of these Palestinians have been kept in concentration camps, essentially, within Israel since the Nakba. Sdei Teiman is one example, essentially a death camp. 135 mutilated Gazans emerged from that institution just over the last couple of weeks. There was evidence that these people had been blindfolded, handicapped, tortured and forced to wear nappies, amputated hands and other ghastly accounts. That's just probably the tip of the iceberg, because from dead bodies, they don't talk and you can't quite get the full story. But the reality is that even the likes of the Physicians for Human Rights in Israel are corroborating exactly what seems to have been going on. And there's the evidence that 1,500 bodies are still being held in these concentration camps or these morgues, wherever they are. So what's going on? Where's the international human rights outcry? Where are the organizations that are supposed to have been monitoring this? To what extent has Israel been held to account for the crimes it's committing? Quite clearly. It's easy now to document the crimes that Israel has committed in the genocide because videos have been coming out, even though, of course, they've banned journalists. No international journalists still allowed in Gaza, which in itself tells you a story. But of course, no journalists get into concentration camps, prisons, the Israelis like to call them. I think death camps is more appropriate. And the darker side of this, of course, is that there's something else going on in Israeli society which doesn't get talked about. Organ trafficking, child trafficking, sex offenders, these are also issues, I think, which are related to the same psychology which is torturing, murdering, maiming these Palestinian prisoners, of which now there are at least 10,000 to 13,000. We don't know, because half of the people that get detained, the Israelis maybe don't even admit to. So what about this other dark side? It's quite clear that many violent extremists, sex offenders, paedophiles are using Israel as a haven. They've started turning that country into a place where they can escape justice. Roland Polanski, a very famous Hollywood filmmaker, it's just one example. There are many, many more. That connection for me with Israeli society and the dark side of sexual abuse has to be connected also to the way many of these Israeli occupation forces have been treating prisoners in prison. Of course, there was that huge debate in the Knesset where it was debated whether a Palestinian had any rights at all in this regard, because Israeli prison officers had actually raped a man in full view of a camera. It was recorded, it was seen, the whole world saw it. And that is just the tip of the iceberg, it's argued. Yet there was the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, supposedly a bastion of democracy in West Asia. Laughable, I know. But the reality is that they were trying to exonerate the people who had raped that Palestinian. To what level has Israeli society sunk in terms of its own morality? If it can rely on notions of the Amalek, rely on Talmudic scriptures or some vague notions of Chosenite superiority, this kind of racist, Jewish supremacist ideology, which now can't be hidden because it's there in full view and it's a part of government policy. And the state of Israel, according to Benjamin Netanyahu, is a Jewish state. That's exactly how they push the line. And they justify everything they do to Palestinians, whether it's bombing and maiming children or abusing prisoners, with that same sense of chosenness, that same sense of supremacy. And yet again, the Western media does not hold them to account. There's never any mention of this in real terms. All we hear is a focus on Israel as a victim or some way of obfuscating that. The Israeli diaspora has a responsibility. Those who funded Israel need to take a deep look at their own morality. If Judaism and if Jewishness means what the Israeli establishment and the Israeli Defense Force is doing to these prisoners in terms of abuse, well, that should really send shockwaves to the Jewish diaspora. And arguably, it's the Jewish diaspora who should be taking Zionists to account more so than anybody else. Nobody's asking for Jews to go in and lead an armed resistance against Zionism. Nobody is expecting that. But the lives that have been given by the Palestinians and all those people who've died for this cause mean that actually the whole world has a responsibility towards these prisoners. And how can we call ourselves democracies? How can we call ourselves humanitarians? How can we see ourselves again in the same light unless we're willing to be honest and to take Israel to task and force the likes of the United Nations and all the other institutions which are meant to protect these Palestinians and their rights to do their job? And that would mean sanctioning Israel. It would mean bringing it to task at the very least to begin with. It would mean all sorts of means of trying to punish Israel, yet that is still not forthcoming, not even from those people who say they're anti-Zionists often within the pro-Palestinian movement. On that note, there's some food for thought. It's for all of us to think about the morality that is being imposed by those in Israel in power and a lot of the public, because you cannot exonerate the Jewish society in this. Well over 70% have consistently been recorded as being okay with genocide, as being okay with killing children, as being okay with expelling and ethnically cleansing Palestinians. This isn't acceptable, not in any human civilized society.